Hey, this is Gordon for Inspiration Cuts. In this video, we're gonna work on a Fantasy Hammer in 3ds Max and Substance Painter. And you can find the longer version on Patreon, and you can check my full course about this Fantasy Hammer on Gumroad, link in the description. Okay, the first step or the first part in creating this Fantasy Hammer is gonna be the high poly modeling, and the high poly modeling, of course, it is the most important we're gonna do here, and it is what is gonna be necessary in order to complete the rest of the things that are gonna make this weapon look great. So we're gonna take care of all the details necessary in order to bake on top of the low poly model or the low poly version of this weapon, which is something that we're gonna create later. So as you can see here, we're trying to create first of all this stick and some rings around it, and also some other pieces that are going to be all over the place, some pointy and sharp things all around these rings that are going to be all over this stick. So this is actually a theme that you can see a lot, and you can see it repeating itself in fantasy weapons, and also in the weapons that are kind of the weapons that you see with the Viking culture and stuff. It is something that we can have a lot of fun creating, and it is also something that can be great looking once we are done with it. And there is a variety of things we can do here. For example, we can actually create some additional stuff like some pieces of metal that are going to support the pieces of wood, and all these rings and pieces of metal that are gonna go around. And also this is also a common theme, these kind of triangular or pointy or kind of an arrow like shapes of pieces of metal that are gonna be all over the place. So here we are trying to modify how the wood, this stick of wood is actually, we're gonna modify how it looks. So probably we're gonna give it a curved look that is gonna amplify and enhance how beautiful it is, because if it's gonna be straight like a normal regular piece of wood, then it is not gonna be interesting, and it's not gonna look like something from fantasy at all. Because if we want to create something that is gonna look old and fantastic like the things we see created in the fantasy stuff, like weapons and shields and all the things that are gonna be actually part of the things we see, like the things we can see in movies like or games like Warcraft or Elder Scrolls or something like that. It's gonna be actually something a lot fun to work with, and I personally like to work on the stuff that are pretty old, or the stuff that are not here yet, which means futuristic stuff and sci-fi, because it is my personal preference. I have many reasons to like to create these stuff, but I think it is something that we can have a lot of fun working with, and the results we can get are going to be amazing. So here I'm also trying to create the big massive rock that is going to be on the front, and this is going to be very noticeable. So this one is going to be actually probably this is going to be the first thing that you're going to see. So we're going to give it a special care. This doesn't mean that we're going to go over the board and create something fantastic here, but we're going to try to deliver a good result. And also I copied that part and took it back, because took it to the back, because there seems there seems a need for we need a little bit of balance, because that big piece of rock in the front needs to be balanced with another piece in the back. And also this one here is going to be a little bit, is going to serve another function, which is the fact that we're going to actually place a blade. As you can see here, we're going to create a cylinder, then we're going to keep only a small part, which is going to be this plane, and we're going to modify it a little bit and give it some thickness in order to make it look like it is a blade standing out from the back. And also this is a nice trick that that the original artist who created this concept was actually very smart about, and he actually did that and made it look very reasonable and fantastic in the same time. So here I'm going to create a kind of a belt that is going to go around the piece of rock in the front, and also it's going to be metallic. So this is going to be metal. It's not going to be something like leather or anything like that, because this serves, I think this serves serves a purpose as being a support piece, probably other pieces that are gonna lean onto, or something like this horn that we're gonna create here, or actually it's gonna keep the that stone or that rock from breaking because it's not as solid as metal. And probably it serves other surfaces, serves other purposes. Probably for the most part it is some artistic purposes, we don't know, but it looks great after all. So I'm gonna create also another set of these sharp elements in the front, because this is how this weapon works. Kind of smashes the enemy, and actually the purpose behind it is to cause as much damage as possible. Okay, and these horns here actually are not going to be complicated, because we could have added a lot more details, but for the sake of simplicity, and just to make sure that everything, we're gonna focus enough on all the aspects of this course and the modeling of this course and everything else. We wanted to give everything a fair shot and not to overcomplicate stuff and then leave out some other stuff, or just make it too long, which is gonna also be a little bit boring unless you actually very determined to make this possible. And please, if you're interested in the in how this and how this model was created and stuff, please check out the course link in this description, and I think you're gonna find it interesting, and the details also are in there, everything with the working files that you need to create this. So here in the back, we're gonna create another piece, another metallic piece that is gonna be attached to this rock or this stone in the back, and also it's gonna look like the piece that we created in the around the first one, and probably is gonna serve the same purpose. And also there are some extra details we need to create, like we need to extrude the surfaces, and we need to apply some symmetry to it, and we're gonna bring some of the sharp pieces, and probably gonna copy some of the other pieces that we created before. And also a good thing to do in modeling is to not create everything from scratch every time, because sometimes you work on something and you find yourself in a situation where you're gonna use some of the stuff you created, so you don't have to waste time creating stuff from scratch all the time. So just please use some of the things you actually created before. Sometimes it is very obvious, like you need to copy one thing over and over for multiple to use them in multiple places, but sometimes it's not pretty obvious, and you need to be smart about it, just to gain some time and to actually keep your sanity, because repetition and doing something that is not going to be fun is kind of a buzzkill, and you don't want to actually destroy your excitement by not knowing how to fast forward and skip the things that you actually can avoid easily with being a little bit smart. Alright, now you can see that we're creating also, we're trying to create another detail here and another piece of metal that is going to go all around this rock, but also it is going to go over all the pieces that we created, so we're gonna dodge a lot of obstacles here, and it's gonna be fast to create, since it's very simple, but some of the areas we need to extrude here actually depends on our ability to select specific polygons and extrude them, which is not going to be difficult at all. But it's interesting how these pieces are going to be created, and they are add a lot to the complexity and the fantasy element of this hammer, and or any other weapon that we are going to create, by the way, probably. And if you like these weapons, and if you made it to the 10 minutes or 11 minutes mark to or into the video, please let me know in the comment section below if you want me to create more tutorials like these and more making of these weapons and stuff, because I'm into them. And if you are into them too, please let me know if you like them or not. So here we are kind of hammering down the details and all the things that we can add here, and also we are trying to fix some of the areas and add anything else that we forgot or we didn't work on previously, and we're gonna try to change and adjust some of the other stuff, like the length of that wooden stick, because it was a little bit too long in my opinion, and I had to bring it down or just make it a little bit shorter. And maybe here we're trying to create these U-shape pieces that are gonna be actually helping the chains to stick themselves in to stay in place. And this is very important because we're gonna create probably 7 or 8 pieces that are gonna help us to create a chain that is gonna add a lot. It's gonna add a lot to how this fantasy hammer is gonna look like, and also it's gonna be very noticeable and is gonna be interesting as well. Even though we're not gonna do we're not gonna spend a lot of time working on it, but the only thing that actually that is interesting, which is the fact that these chains here are kind of the cost of polygons and triangles that they're gonna add, and the weight that they're gonna add to the poly count of this weapon is gonna be a little bit overwhelming, because overall this as far as I'm concerned, the sharp pieces on front of the hammer and the chains are going to be the most actually the most polygon consuming. And now we're going to add some support edges, and the process of adding support edges is going to be a no-brainer, because it is very obvious. And the only question is how long it's going to take, and you gotta make sure that you don't make a lot of mistakes, because if you actually forget to do this in certain areas, it's gonna screw up some areas in the bake, and you are going to notice some errors going on when it comes to baking the maps in Substance Painter if you actually forget to support some areas. And if you of course you need to apply the turbo smooth modifier, which is going to support all the areas that you need to support, in all the corners and all the edges. And sometimes you need to do a double check in order to make sure that everything is working properly. All right, there aren't a lot of things to say about this process, because it is highly repetitive, and it's kind of very obvious what are we gonna do. It is just a matter of time before we actually end up with the thing that we imagine ourselves having. So it's not gonna be that difficult at all. And of course, there is a good method that I use in order to make sure that I am not gonna forget, or at least I'm gonna forget at least a small amount of the elements without being supported, which is to create a special material, and I'm gonna apply it to the pieces that I worked on. And this visual cue is going to be very important, and is going to facilitate and make it very easier for me to detect and to know exactly what are the pieces that are left. And yeah, it's gonna actually indicate how much progress you made. I think there is a lot of good stuff that can come up with using this method, which is very simple, but I think it's very effective. All right, there aren't a lot of things we can say here, so I would say that it is highly repetitive and very simple, but the results that you can get are gonna be expected, and there are a few rules we need to respect, but for the most part, it's gonna be okay um, if you do actually stick to them, and you'll be just fine. Probably this piece here is the hardest, or the most difficult to add support edges for, since there are a lot of triangles, and triangles don't really work well with the swift loop, or any kind of add selection like ring or loop or anything, because polygons actually quads are the most suitable polygons for these kinds of processes. Okay, also these chains are going to be supported very quickly, and all the elements that are going to be around it, for example these triangles and stuff, are going to be the same thing. And there is no need actually to add so many support edges when it comes to the stick. So now we're going to create the low poly version. So actually I saved a special layer in order to do this, and I called it just a fantasy hammer underscore low poly. And the high poly is in its own layer. So now we're working on the low poly layer. Just we're gonna remove all the elements that we consider floating geometry, and what we'll do next is, in my opinion, is to remove some of the things that are not going to be extremely necessary, but later in texturing I thought to myself I could have left them, and it could have actually made it could have made it a lot easier for us to in the process of texturing, because sometimes to select, create masks and stuff in Substance Painter, you need to rely on polygon selection, and that was a big element that we missed. And probably next time I will be a little bit more careful in these matters. You just sometimes you just kind of get carried away in the kind of the process you're doing, and you forget what comes next. So you need to actually calculate what's going to happen in the future, and you need to see through for kind of see through the processes that are going to come next, and you don't actually get carried with doing the only thing you're doing right now. Okay, now we are pretty much done with the process of adding actually or creating the low poly version. We're gonna remove all the things that potentially are going to be replaced with the high poly after we do the baking, and we're going to remove all the edges and the vertices that are not going to affect the silhouette and how it looks. So I think this is going to be very important, and of course it's going to lower the poly count, and it's going to make it a little bit lighter, even though there are a lot of pieces here that are going to kind of causing this model to have an enormous number of polygons, even though this is going to be a low poly model for games. And probably we're going to delete some of these small pieces. And for now, we're gonna go to UV unwrapping, and UV unwrapping is a process that is gonna be very important. It's kind of a cornerstone, and doing it the right way is going to actually have a good effect on the end result. Okay, there are so many methods that are going to allow you to perform and unwrap the UVs and stuff, but you gotta have to choose the ones that are more effective. For example, I try to actually I try to use some methods that are not gonna be typical, but at the end of the day, you can always go around and try to fix stuff if it is going to be necessary, even though it's going to look like it is messy and not organized in the beginning. And it's very important to get an end result that is going to be acceptable, and actually acceptable according to your standards and according to the standards of something that is going to be working properly. So it doesn't matter the method you use as much as it matters the end result that you are gonna get. There are a lot of things we can do here, and there are some rules in order to get some good results in unwrapping. Like I actually created a video in which I talked about all the rules I kind of I respect in terms of creating and unwrapping my UVs, and most of them are very good, but there are very few you don't have to, you have to not violate, and you need to absolutely respect in order to get some good results. Also, there are some types of pieces or some parts of your model that actually need to be unwrapped a certain way. There is no way around it, because there are some methods that are absolutely necessary for certain types of unwrapping. All right, now we're gonna jump to the next part, which is gonna be naming. And naming is very important because the process of baking in Substance Painter highly depends on the names that we're gonna actually add to every piece. So in order for Substance Painter to know exactly what are the pieces that we are gonna bake, and if we wanted to know which piece is gonna be baked on which, we need to name the two pieces that are gonna be related to each other. The low poly and the high poly, we need to give them the similar names. The only difference is gonna be for the suffix. And the suffix I usually choose, or I usually work with, is gonna be underscore LP for low poly, and underscore HP for high poly. And as you can see here, I'm using a tool that is called Rename Objects that you can find in the newer versions of 3ds Max. I don't know when this tool was introduced because I didn't use it for the longest time, but it seems like it exists in the versions probably 2016 and all the newest versions, and it's very effective and it's very powerful. So here we're trying to do our job, which is gonna be to since the low poly model is kind of attached, all the pieces are attached together, and the high poly pieces are obviously detached. So what we'll do is actually we will select all the pieces from the high poly and give them a certain name. For example, let's just say I don't know, maybe let's just say stick underscore LP, and the high poly does not only have a stick but also some details like some screws or some small metallic pieces or some floating geometry. So we're gonna have to call all the pieces, the stick and all the other pieces that are gonna be kind of on the other end of the spectrum that are going to be baked on top of the low poly. We need to give them the same name, because this way Substance Painter will understand that these pieces are going to be the same, and they should consider them it should consider these pieces to be part of the same deal, and the baking process is going to be actually around these pieces exclusively. And of course, what we are trying to do now is actually to check if there are any mistakes or if we forgot something when it comes to naming or anything of that sort of things that we probably need to be careful when dealing with because later it's going to be important. So now we need to actually go back a little bit and do some smoothing groups, and this process is something we can do early on before unwrapping, or we can do later. But I personally do it most of the times. I try to do it before unwrapping because it helps in the process. So what we're gonna do is basically select all the polygons of all the elements we have here, and what we will do is actually we will automatically create some groups that are going to define which areas are going to be smooth and which areas are going to be sharp and hard edge. And this is very important because it helps, since we're not going to use any support edges or any kind of thing of that sort. But then later, when it comes to baking, all the details and all the information that will come from the high poly model are going to be baked on top of the low poly anyways. But if there are some problems with the UV, actually the smoothing groups, the high poly can't do anything about it. If there are some hard corners and hard edges in the low poly version, then we have to fix it using smoothing groups. There is almost no other way to do it other than making that every smoothing groups is actually, all these smoothing groups are perfectly working with what the high poly model looks like in terms of smoothing and how the groups are going to be like. Sometimes also even the high poly we need to adjust its smoothing group sometimes if we see some weird things going on with how the surface of the high poly model look like. we have to fix it and we have to adjust the smoothing groups. So it all depends on the result of the baking, and other than that, you're all good to go and do the other thing, which is going to be baking. And to do baking, we are really going to export the files, the low poly and the high poly, and these are two basic elements that we're going to work with. So in the baking, we're going to use some of the most important maps like normals, ambient occlusion, thickness, and like curvature and stuff. And of course, we're going to use mesh by name, and we're going to change we're going to change some parameters in order to do baking. Then we're going to jump to texturing, which is, I think, the most exciting part of all what we've done here, and it is kind of the reward of all the previous work we've done. And actually texturing can actually lift or kind of destroy your work here. And the first thing we're going to do in order to start texturing, we will create some groups and folders, and these folders are going to be accompanied with masks, and these masks are going to tell the Substance Painter that all the materials and all the fill and all actually the fills and the fill layers and all the other layers and materials and smart materials that are going to be inside that folder are actually going to work only on a certain area that is kind of decided by the masks that we create. So that mask is going to determine exactly what the elements or what the textures and the maps inside that folder which kind of it's going to determine exactly what are the areas that it's going to touch, and the areas other than that it's not going to be affected. So I would say that this process is very important in order to help you avoid a lot of hassle later on. And as you can see here, I started adding some wood materials, and I've already added the gold, which was a really kind of, I thought it could have been a good combination with the other metal. And as you can see here, this shiny metallic material, I just kind of made it a little bit darker. And also when it comes to creating these sharp parts like these teeth in the front and that blade in the back, it's also important to give it a different material. And when it comes to creating that those two pieces of rock or stones in the front and the back, it is important to use a specific masks and specific fill layers. And of course you're going to play around with the height of the information. So the information height information is extremely important in order to deliver that depth that makes whatever we're working on here, it makes it look a little bit more realistic. Because I would say that working on something like stones or rocks is a little bit difficult in terms of kind of conveying a really realistic image or a realistic look that we're going for. So probably we need on that part we're gonna need to add a little bit of extra layers and fill layers and masks in order to add some depth and complexity to that element. And also because it is big and it is gonna be all in your face, so probably it is going to be the first thing that you're gonna see. That's why we're gonna take care of it. And also you can add some scratches to the metallic parts like the blade, and basically you can add this all over the place. And the sharp part of the blade is gonna be brighter, because we want to actually make it look like it is a real blade. Because if it is all the same color, or at least if it is the same kind of have the same brightness when it comes to how light or dark the color, the base color of the metal is, it's not gonna look as real as it should be. And also I think that I overdone, or I kind of just did a lot more than necessary when it comes to scratches, because I wanted to deliver the idea or I wanted to give a feeling that this weapon was used a lot, and the damage. I personally like to use a lot of damage. And also we can add some ornaments on certain pieces, like these rings on the stick, which is gonna be super cool, and is gonna add a lot of interesting looks and nice details to the hammer, the fantasy hammer. And also another thing, we can add some scriptures or old text to to convey that the like this hammer was some that it has been used, and there are some sculptures here and there just to make it a little bit realistic and to add some personal touch to it. And finally, we're going to add some dirt, and this is um, completely alternative. All right, now it is time to actually render. It's time for lighting and rendering, and this process is gonna be quick. We're gonna do it here in Marmoset Toolbag, which is a great software for lighting and rendering. So the first thing we're gonna do is to bring our maps that we exported from Substance Painter, and we're gonna try to install them and put them in place in one material. Then we're gonna apply this material to our fantasy hammer here, and of course we're gonna change some parameters just in case, because the initial parameters are not gonna be perfect. And then we're gonna add some lights. We're gonna add the main light, we're gonna add a fill with a little bit different of color and a little bit less intensity, and we're gonna add an overhead or over the top light that is gonna actually fill some of the shadows from the top. And we're gonna place a camera in which and this camera is gonna help us to take some photos and render some images in order to put them somewhere where people are gonna see it or something. So I hope this was something you liked. I hope you liked this video, and if you want more details about the creation of this fantasy hammer, please check out the link in the description below, and to find the course about the creation of this hammer in detail.